You know, sometimes I do these videos and I really know what they're all about before I even begin the research. Other times I do these videos and it changes my mind halfway through because I'm going back over the information and I'm going over new information I gathered and I'm going, this makes me think something. This gives me an idea. Well, today's video is more going to be a discussion using two examples of why some powers have aircraft carriers, even when they are not major powers in and of themselves. Why aircraft carriers are useful. And you're probably going to hear the usual stuff trotted out a bit, parts, that they allow them to project power, that they give them the ability to punch above their weight, that they give them a status, etc., which is useful, and that at the time there were a lot more powers which had aircraft carriers. It's kind of like today, the numbers of powers having aircraft carriers is slowly going up. It went down in the 1980s and 1990s, and it's now going up again. But honestly, that's not it. That's not the purpose of discussion in so many ways. These are carriers for the Dominions, and they make sense as part of the larger Royal Navies for them to have carriers. It makes sense for the Royal Navy for those other navies to have carriers. It makes sense for those nations to have carriers as part of the force they're slotting into, because it means that there is a local carrier for the Royal Navies to use as the hub of their power projection in that area, in their locality. And in the case of Melbourne, she has a sister as well in service. She has HMAS Sydney, and they're good ships. In fact, this is a class, the Majestic class of 1942 light fleet carriers. Well, Majestic becomes Melbourne, serving with the Royal Australian Navy. Terrible becomes Sydney, serving with the Royal Australian Navy. Magnificent becomes Magnificent, serving with the Royal Canadian Navy. Hercules becomes Vikrant, serving with the Indian Navy. And Powerful becomes Bonaventure, serving with the Royal Canadian Navy. The only one which isn't complete is Leviathan. I'm presuming because the Royal New Zealand Navy didn't want one. Because that class, by their definition, by this point, are really becoming the ones we give to the Dominions. And the Colossus class, the class that's sort of our sister's precedents, well, they served with the French Navy, the Royal Navy, of course, but also the Dutch Navy, the Argentine Navy, the Royal Australian Navy, the Brazilian Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy. They do all sorts of things, and they are modified into maintenance and repair ships as well, in case of Triumph and Perseus. They are an interesting group of ships. They are a flexible group of ships. They provide a capability in terms of aviation. And they provide, I would say, medium powers and regional powers, the ability to slot into something larger and be part of something larger. Suddenly, when you're thinking about the fleets you might face, you have to add in fleets which are nowhere near you because they have the ability to project power towards you. And yes, they might not have the logistics, etc., on their own to do that, but they have the capabilities and components to slot into the larger force, which does give those nations the ability to punch above their weight, because it makes them useful to the larger force. Whether that larger force is British or American, is a NATO force, or is something else, it is useful to have allies who can slot in and provide a growth in capabilities. Now, sometimes those allies will provide a growth in logistical capabilities. And that's quite advantageous as well, although that's usually a harder sell. Sometimes those nations provide you with an aviation capability. But the question is, why do those nations want their own organic naval aviation capability? Well, there's a reason why I've picked on Canada and Australia here, because both have a similar issue. Both of them are in a scenario where they have a very, very large country. They are a very large place. And they have a problem. Their population is not evenly spread over that place. In fact, there are vast swathes of territory where they barely have anyone there at all. And if you want to defend that, you need to be able to project power over that. You need to be able to have a presence internally as well as externally. And the thing is, whilst you can make the case, well, we can defend that with fighters based from this base, and we can tank and support those fighters. You know, we can use air-to-air refueling to get those fighters where they need to be. That's lovely. Where are their reinforcements if they run out of missiles? Oh, and by the way, they have to fly all the way back, of course, home to get reloads. So yeah, that's good for image. We've got there. That's not good for a credible capability. And it's okay if you're only dealing with the image of a threat, i.e. someone who keeps sending, I don't know, bare Fs to wander around your airspace, and you're going, well, it's a turboprop aircraft from the 1950s using 1940s technology. What exactly are you planning on doing? I mean, the equivalent aircraft is the B-52. But the B-52 looks a lot more modernized with its carbon fiber wings and all sorts of things than the poor bare F does. We all love the 295. It's a lovely aircraft, but it is, in many ways, a bit of a flying anachronism. And I say this as someone who defends the fairy swordfish on a regular basis. But, while that's your threat, fine. When your threat is something serious, suddenly you have other issues. And then you have the problem of, what happens if your defense is based off working with others? What happens if your defense is based off being a good ally? Because you are a large nation with a small population. Therefore, you need allies to be able to defend your territory effectively. Well, the old saying is, God helps best those who help themselves. But let's be honest, in alliances, you get out what you put in. If you are an alliance member who's active, supportive, and putting in facilities to the best of your ability, and providing capabilities which are important to the other alliance members, you'll find magically they will be more helpful to you when you need it. So there's that. So this is where Melbourne and Bonaventure really do start to intrigue me, because they are ships which have so much capability inside them. More importantly, what they are for and what they do and what they get up to is different. Their utility and how their governments approach them, and the reason why their governments discontinue having them is interesting. I wouldn't say necessarily the logic works, and I'd argue that both the Australians and Canadians have spent the time since getting rid of their carriers seriously trying to regenerate that capability without generating a carrier, because they are pretending that no, we don't need a carrier because we got rid of it. Look, the only thing more depressing that is the British government gapping it for 10 years, because it's an essential item, so we're procuring it, but it's so essential we're gapping it for 10 years as a capability. and then being surprised when the cost goes up to bring it back into service and support everything and get everything organised when it eventually comes into service. Can't think why that happened. But no. So, that's sort of the intro. Today's discussion topic, Bonaventure and Melbourne. So that all being said, let's go through the class, go through their history. And what I really love about these ships, and I really, really do love about these ships, is that they are light fleet carriers. They are this class which the Royal Navy builds, which literally are... We honestly weren't building Unicorn as a testbed. Honestly, HMS Unicorn was not a testbed for this. She's a forward aviation support ship, not a light fleet carrier. Anyone who says so, anyone who says that and claims that is producing nothing but scurrilous lies. Scurrilous lies, I tell you. Unicorn's a forward aviation support ship. You have the honour of several admirals saying that she was a forward aviation support ship. Literally, upon their honour, they were honest that she was not a carrier, she was a forward aviation support ship. The fact that she is her design quite so easily becomes a template for the light fleet carrier, where basically they strip out some of the maintenance capabilities of her and just turn it into a fleet and just focus on carrier operations and tweak the engines a bit so that they can do higher speed. We'll leave to one side. We'll leave that entirely to one side. Just does it so quickly. But light fleet carriers were of course designed to be enough aircraft to still do the fleet carrier role, carry enough aircraft to do the fleet carrier role, but be efficient enough to build that you can churn them out in large numbers. They were also designed to be very easy to repair because they weren't going to be very well armoured, and they were basically designed as expendable. Because the idea was that you would run them. This was the Admiral Purvis's idea, the Future Fleet Committee's idea, was that you would have these carriers in service rapidly, and they would fill the gap until you got more proper fleet carriers, i.e. the Audaceuses, the Maltas, into service. They'd fill the carrier gap. They provide the Royal Navy enough aviation capabilities, and they would basically be used as a fleet naval version of the Woolworths carriers that were the escort carriers. These were going to fill the gap until you had what you properly wanted in service. And if any of them are left, then you keep using them until they break down. But frankly, they are designed to just fill the gap. The fact that they end up serving quite so long, and we're talking many, many decades, HMS Vengeance, which became HMAS Vengeance, and then Minas Gerais, probably had the longest serving record, serving till 2001, and being scrapped in India in 2004. But there is also, of course, Venerable, which became the Royal Netherlands Navy's Karel Doorman, and the Argentinian Navy Ticinio de Mayo, which almost got sunk by a Royal Navy submarine in the Falklands War, which served till 1999 and was scrapped in India in 1999. And there's a fair numbers which served in the into the 1980s, and similarly. Honestly, you had 3 serving into the late 1990s, 2000s. We're talking, therefore, 5-6 decades of service as frontline carriers. The answer to why they could last so long is because they were built like they were. It made them incredibly easy to upgrade and maintain. It made it incredibly easy to adapt them to what you wanted to do with them. because they didn't have the armour, they didn't have the structure that full fleet carriers had, by necessity of their size and duties. It meant that there were complications in terms of the size and of aircraft you could operate, and honestly, I would argue that the advent of the Harrier probably kept them in service a lot longer than originally they would go into, and similar like aircraft like that. But the fact is, they're useful. They're a light aircraft that can operate off them. That's what you need. So they are a very useful asset to also to be giving out to these powers. To a medium power, these are incredibly flexible assets, if you're prepared to invest in using them. If you're prepared to invest in using them. And that's the important thing. The other scenario, especially for Canada and Australia, is that they were, of course, part of the Royal Navy. So whilst they were the Royal Canadian Navy, Royal Australian Navy, the Royal Navy's sort of group of navies, whilst it doesn't have the same sort of one service existence it enjoys prior to and during World War II, post World War II, through the Cold War, they still do a lot of work together, and there's a lot of sharing of information and a lot of bouncing off each other's facilities. And in many ways, the Royal Navy's industrial hub facilities were still providing an industrial hub for them to work from. This gives them an advantage. This makes these things far more capable and far more viable option for them to pursue. And as I alluded to before, it's also advantageous to the Royal Navy. Just as it's advantageous to the US Navy today, and was advantageous to the US Navy during the Cold War. Having allies within regions or who will actually have a genuine global reach capability is a force multiplier. Because otherwise, you have to do everything yourself. And that is expensive, as the British would tell you from when they ran their empire. Doing everything itself was the main reason why the British didn't want to run an empire like that. They looked at the way the French were running their empire, and there is the whole reason the British started the minionization process, which is their decolonization process, and it's literally to save money. Because they're looking at how the empire is going to go and get more and more expensive as time goes on, and they don't want to spend that money. We didn't get into empire to spend money, we got into empire to make money. If it starts costing us money, we don't want to be in it. Now, how do we do this in a way that's going to preserve us having the access to the money and the resources and things we want? Well, dominionization, creating democracies, and making sure it goes into sort of a stable nation state that is still linked within the framework of empire or commonwealth as it was going to become, and as it has become, and all sorts of things. Yeah, that's a pretty sweet deal. And yes, this is not someone sitting there going, "Mwahaha," coming up with a plan overnight by themselves. That is how the British thinking evolves. It evolves over the space of about 30 years in the late 19th century. And when it gets to it, that's the path they start pursuing. Because it makes sense. In which case, carriers for Dominions make a lot of sense. Again, capital ships for Dominions in the run-up to World War One and during World War One made more sense, but then, of course, the treaty system happened. But honestly, if the treaty system had happened, if there had been a gap in the treaty system which allowed carriers like Hermes to be built, and if you had the Washington Treaty had 15,000 tons limit of vessels, which there were no limitations of construction on, etc. So you could have built a lot of Hermes starships. I'm fairly sure the British would have lightly suggested to the Australians and Canadians, definitely, maybe, possibly New Zealand, but definitely the Australians and Canadians, would you like a Hermes-style carrier? Would you like a small carrier? because it fits their strategic need and their need for presence and the need for overwatch capability and their aviation need, but also it assists the British by having these smaller carriers being where they need to be in the world as a forward presence, so the British can concentrate their fleet carriers in places like the home waters or the Mediterranean, where they have a lot of supplies and they have a lot of facilities, so it's cheaper for them to run their fleet. And also means they don't have to react with their ships every single time there's a problem. If there's a minor problem, it can be dealt with by the Dominions ships and the Dominions forces, which of course gives luster, status and honour to the Dominion, but also means the Royal Navy saves money, time and effort, and wear and tear on their ships. It's cynical, but it's the truth. For the Dominions, what's in it for them? Well, they get to feel a greater part of the security process of the Empire, which means, as I've said before, with alliances, you get out what you put in. The more they can contribute, the more they're likely to get stuff out. But also, they feel stronger and more independent and capable themselves. And by dealing with their local area, they feel independent and far more strong. They know that their ability to deal these things and to face off against larger powers especially rests on the fact they are part of the British Empire, the British Commonwealth, the Dominions. But they're able to do it themselves. They've got a cruiser, they've got a carrier, they've got destroyers. There's a really interesting picture in here. And I'm going to jump forward to that before I do the Shame's book plug. And this is Melbourne. And she's got 2 Daring class destroyers with her. Just look at that as an imposing task force. That is presence. That is capability. That is, yeah, we don't have a cruiser. Really, do we need one? Look at what we're packing. Look at what we've got here with us. You want to fight it? This period, you don't want to fight that. You really don't want to fight that. That's 1959. That's Vendetta and Voyager. And Melbourne. That's a collection of names and a quality of ships which you don't want to have an argument with. And that is what Australia could put out as a task force. They could add in other ships as well, but they didn't need to as much. So, when this comes out, well, the move will be over. This house will be in someone else's care until it's sold. I will have come back. I will literally have got the keys for the new place, dropped my mum and sister off, on the train, come back here to sort out this place and then drive my car down. Joy of having 3 cars to drive all the way down there. Instead of driving separately, I'm driving my mum's car because her arthritis is playing up at this moment. It's great, I got pneumonia and my mum's got arthritis, and the word or two driving together. It's a really sensible idea for moving house, that one. We also are going to have the Poodle with us as our fluffy research assistant in that car. And he's the one who likes to talk to other drivers. He believes that if he wags and woofs at trucks hard enough, they will blow their horns to him, because that once happened, and he likes the horns. And so he's decided if he woofs and wags his tail hard enough at lorry drivers, they will blow the horns for him. Anyway, so thank you again for all your support. Thank you for people who bought the book. Thank you for everything that's going on. You've made the transitions in life possible. You've made all these things possible. I think I talked to the last one a lot about getting a new bed. The weird thing was that when I did that video was I had just done all the maths on the bed, on how old and how long I'd had it, and read all the guidelines about how often you're supposed to place a mattress, and sort of thinking, going, yeah, so basically my mattress has... No wonder I have a bad back. Okay, yeah. So that will all be sorted. Thank you everyone for your support. But literally, when this video goes out, I should be if everything's gone to plan, I should be driving down while this video is... I should hopefully have reached there when this video goes live. Which is fun. Thank you for your support and your kindness. Thank you for all your help. Thank you for making this channel possible. I'd also like to point out that we're currently 2,500 subscribers away from the 15,000 target I need to reach by Christmas for the bet to be over. So, please, to my 12,500 subscribers, thank you very much. And could I please ask you all a favour? Could you ask one friend to subscribe? It just has to be till December the 31st. It doesn't have to be forever if they don't want to. I just need to have enough subscribers that I can. I'm over the 15,000 mark at Christmas. Okay. No, seriously, there will be things done. And again, sorry about these videos. Sorry, I'm not doing the normal rate of videos I'm doing. Sorry, I'm not doing the normal lives I'm doing. I was going to try and do a last live from here. And I timed it, and I kept the longest I can go before I have a coughing fit, which involves stuff coming out of here and here simultaneously, is about 30 minutes. So yeah, that was not a good idea. No, I'm not doing it live. Not until I got that up to at least an hour, I think. Then once an hour I can sort of just put up a picture on the screen, mute the microphone and cough my heart out. Just fun times, you know. I love pneumonia. It's really cool. All the cool kids have it. They do. Anyway, thank you very much. So, let's consider the Majestic class as a whole. I know I've already done a video about them and light fleet carriers, so I'm not going into too much technical detail, but what were we talking about when we're talking about Majestic class? They are roughly 16,000 tons in standard. 250 tons less officially. Unofficially, it gets very close to 16,000 tons. Full load, 19,500 to 20,000. Speed, 25 knots. Fairly decent. Range, 12,000 nautical miles at 14 knots. Up to 52 aircraft when they're first completed. Draft under standard load is 19 foot 6 inches. Draft under full load is 24 foot 9 inches. They had 4 Admiralty free drum boilers. Again, useful. They supplied 2 Parsons geared turbines, driving 2 propeller shafts with 40,000 shaft horsepower. And they had roughly 30 40mm bofors, 6 twin mountings and 18 single mountings. They're good ships. They are. This is the details as built. They all evolve over time. They truly do. And it's something to think about, because these ships are what allow medium powers to be, to an extent, strategically independent. That's the other thing about aircraft carriers. They allow you a level of strategic independence, because you can project power where you want to project power. You do have the capability to project power where you need to project power. And that's a really interesting thing to think about when we're talking about Canada. Because HMCS Bonaventure is absolutely glorious at that. She truly is. Her career highlights include turning from a fighter ASW carrier, so a pretty decent support carrier, to, well, an ASW carrier, being a constant presence at about as many exercises as she can get to, and basically being Canada's constant going of, we're here! Yes, we have these excellent ships, these excellent anti-submarine warfare vessels, and this is our centerpiece, which gives them the ability to reach out and affect things. It's what gives them the helicopter and the air overwatch and all the capabilities we need to support them. It's really useful. It's also slightly insane, but it works well for them. And when I say slightly insane, I mean it literally turns up with an air group of fighters, anti-submarine warfare aircraft, and anti-submarine warfare helicopters. So it's got 2 sets of ASW and some Banshees aboard. And the Banshees are just like you think they would be. They are scary, screaming jets. They really are. But it works. And for many years, Bonaventure provides the Canadians with this capability, with the ability to project power. And it's useful that way. Melbourne, well, Melbourne has a bit of a problem because Sydney gets a lot of the glamorous postings. Melbourne has a bit of a habit of crashing into her escorts, which is just not good. But she is a good carrier. She's a useful asset. And having two of them means that the Australians usually have one available. It's the reality is that one is pretty much a white elephant in anything you have. You have an availability occasional. Two is an availability, i.e., one's usually available. Three is a capability because one is always available, or at least it's so rare you don't have one available that it's an freak scenario. Four is a guaranteed capability. That's why deterrent submarines tend to be multiples of four. Or, well, once you get past four, then you can just do whatever you like, really. But, usually four is the minimum number for a ballistic missile deterrent submarine force. Three is usually what you want to go for if you want to have this asset available, and therefore have that capability. And then as you get lower and lower down, and as you get more than four, you can actually generate a far greater percentage of your force. For example, if you have 8 vessels, you will usually have a guaranteed of 2 at sea operational, a guarantee of 2 more available, 2 more in training or transit, and only 2 in refit, because you can spread the load around. And the more force you have, the more you have that capability to deal with problems and issues which come up without disrupting the various training flows, the various maintenance flows you have for vessels. Basically, it's the fewer you have, the more problems you have when something goes wrong. For example, if you have a force of 10 vessels and one suddenly develops an issue with its propeller shaft, well, the odds are you're going to have enough out of the 9 remaining vessels that you can fudge things around without mucking up stuff too much. If you have 3 and one develops problems with prop shaft, it's a good chance the other 2 are going to have whatever programs they are in disrupted. And that's going to have long-term consequences. Because disruption of maintenance programs, disruption of training programs always have long-term consequences. So basically, with Melbourne and Sydney, the Australians have an availability and they use it. They do it well as well. For them, it's really important because if you consider where they are in the world and their threat axes and how people can approach them, having carriers, having the ability to put a carrier across that threat axis and cover the area around it, monitor the area around it, is very useful, especially when you consider where exactly the important things are for the Australian economy, what are the stalwart parts of its economy are, its population centres, and how you can defend it. Because the thing about Australia is it's quite spread out. I've been there, I've visited it, it's lovely. But when they go, oh, this is a quick trip between these cities, and you go, it's a 3-hour flight. That's a quick trip? Yeah. In European terms, that's crossing quite a large chunk of the continent. That's not the distance between cities, and certainly not a quick trip between cities. So for the Australians, again, these were things which would go to exercises. Again, Australia, which is resource rich, tech-rich to a large extent, but population poor and population density very poor. These were assets. They could send to exercises. They could show their commitment. Sydney takes part in Korea and does all sorts of operations, filling in with the Royal Navy. It's a good example of the Royal Navy's basically acting as one navy. And Melbourne does her turns too in exercises doing similar things. They're useful vessels. They really are. So, with that in mind, what should we be talking about? What should we be thinking about when we're talking about these vessels? Well, so with that in mind, let's see what we get to. You see, these ships were good value for money. They really were. I mean, honestly, the light fleet carriers are obscenely good value for money for what comes out of them from the Royal Navy. It's one of those scenarios, again, you sit there and look at the history, and the Royal Navy has a very weird 1920s and 30s. I mean, they have so many programs they half-start and get into, and all these things. It's a real muck around of technology and development and all sorts of things going on, but by the time you get to about 1939, Henderson has sort of corralled everyone to start going in the right direction. And it's one of the annoying things about him dying when he does, is then he's not around to see his plans come to fruition. It's the fact that there was this competition between a dual-purpose destroyer weapon, the 4.5, and the cruiser dual-purpose weapon, the 5.25. Which was also supposed to be for capital ships, because, you know, you want something slightly heavier than a 4.5 inch for a cruiser or a capital ship, if in case it has to fight something which is a cruiser. Let's be honest, a 4.5 versus most cruisers actually turned out to be surprisingly, well, unsurprisingly when you consider the armor grade on most cruisers that the Royal Navy was fighting, actually quite effective, but it wasn't supposed to be, okay? It was not supposed to be. That's the problem. It's not supposed to be as effective as it turned out to be. But, you know, there are unexpected wins and benefits at every other point. But leaving that all to one side, the light fleet carriers really are a product of some very hard work and some very heavy development in the 1920s and 30s. That led to refining just exactly you want to make a carrier viable. What is viability for a carrier? What is utility for a carrier? What can you get out of what, basically? And it works. But I think that's also part of the problem. I would say myself, one of the reasons why you have the trouble you do today in justifying for many nations naval aviation assets despite their utility, and I would argue that for Canada, Australia, and a few other nations there is still a good argument to be made for such a useful asset. There is no light fleet carrier equivalent. Think about the carrier designs we have going through. There are no light fleet carrier designs. They are the Queen Elizabeth class, people point to and go, well, what about them? They are Vistal carriers. They are not light fleet carriers. They are full-on fleet carriers. Yes, the air group is not as big as perhaps you might like it to be, and they're not as big as you might like them to be, and you might prefer them if they were Catabar. But leaving that all to one side, the size of aircraft has evolved over time and all these things. They are fleet carriers. They are most definitely full-bore fleet carriers. Yes, for Britain. And yes, they are fleet carriers which only really make sense if Britain also buys a whole load of LHDs to work with them. Because if you had 3 LHDs and those 2 carriers, and they are all sharing the same aircraft and just tailoring their air groups to their different missions, i.e. strike or amphibious warfare, and being able to support in the other roles in necessary, that would make a lot of sense and suddenly would make everyone go, wow, Britain, some strategic ingenuity there. We had the idea, we didn't follow through. It happens so often. But leaving that to one side. The point is, there isn't really something for nations to be able to pick off the shelf light fleet carrier. Yes, you can go, well, that came about because of World War II. And yes, you can argue it did. But also you can argue, why isn't there such a design wandering around? Why isn't there such a ship available? So here's my question to you. What would your design for a light fleet carrier be today? And which countries do you think would want to use it? Be really interested to know. And why do you think they'd be using it? So, once again, apologies. This video has not been as long as it was originally intended to be, but it wasn't originally intended not to be the full an hour and a half video. This was actually going to be about an hour long, so the fact it's going to be about 40 minutes is, I consider, quite good, as most of it's in there. I left some stuff for the key ships videos, which are coming out on these things. When I get around to redoing them or doing them again, I'll be citing them soon. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for your help. Thank you very much for your kindness. Thank you for watching the videos. And yeah, thank you for putting up with me being ill. What have we got coming up next? We have land-based naval aviation, a discussion. Ooh, that's going to be a fun one. And then it's the Forrestal class. I'm looking forward to that. They're interesting ships. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching, and have a nice evening.